In a recent discussion, Anthony Rogers went on a bit of a rabbit trail on Mark 6:49 through 50, and he hit a lot of things in a really succinct way. So I want to share a piece of that clip. You should watch the whole thing, but this clip has a lot of really good information in it, and I wanted to piggyback on some of that. But first, let's watch the clip.
God appearing to Moses, God saying, you can't see my face and live. I'll pass by you, right? I'll put you in the cleft of the rock. I'll pass by you. You'll see my back or receding glory and so forth. It's interesting in the New Testament when Jesus in Mark 6, there's this statement that you see commentators just stumbling over and missing. The disciples are out in the boat and going across, and they're struggling at the oars. We're told that the wind was against them and so forth, and they just can't get across the ocean or the sea. And Jesus comes walking to them on the sea. And then it says that Jesus intended to pass by them. And when you read that, a lot of people think it's like Jesus, here's the disciples, they're being tossed around by the wind in the boat, and Jesus is just strolling on the waters and just going to walk right by them. Well, what you find out is, you pay attention to the text, and it goes on to say, at the end of the account, it talks about them being amazed, and then it says, because they did not understand when the incident of the loaves. So what it's saying is, it's pointing back to a previous incident, and it says they didn't get it. That's why they're puzzled here, right? That's why they're not getting it here. And that's why Jesus is doing what he's doing here. They miss the point of Jesus feeding, think about it, a multitude of Israelites in the wilderness miraculously. What does that suggest? These are the people of God. God fed the people of Israel in the wilderness, right? The people that he delivered from the sea, right? The Israelites. So here's Jesus. He feeds a multitude of people in the wilderness. The disciples don't get it. So Jesus puts them on a boat. He remains on land. He prays while they're out there struggling all night at the oars, being tossed around by the wind. And then it says he intended to pass by them. The idea is that Jesus, in light of their blindness, their hardness of heart, is intentionally orchestrating this situation so that he can reveal himself to them. He's going to pass by them. And what does he do in the course of this? When he goes to pass by them, it says he revealed his name to them, right? It says they thought they saw a ghost, and Jesus said, do not be afraid. I am, in the literal Greek, ego eimi, right? Take courage. So, and then when you look at Isaiah 40 through 55, you have this whole section of the prophet Isaiah, which is the new Exodus section, where he's talking about God doing a greater thing than he did when he delivered the people from Egypt. In Isaiah 43, when it's talking about the future, God says that he's going to be with his people when they pass through the waters. He's going to deliver them. And then he says, therefore, do not be afraid. And at least twice in that same context, he calls himself I am, right? So Isaiah 43, you have this conjunction of God saying, don't be afraid, I am, and promising to be with his people when they pass through the waters. In Mark 6, Matthew 14, John 6, parallel accounts, Jesus rescues the disciples from the sea, declares his name to them, I am, and says, do not be afraid, right? There's all this interweaving going on.
Now, given the nature of that interview and that portion, he wasn't being exhaustive on the passage. So I wanted to kind of fill in, some of the, not so much the gaps, but I wanted to add a little bit of support of what he was talking about. I'm sure he's aware of this stuff, but again, given the constraints, I don't want to imply that he doesn't know about this stuff. So the first thing I want to do is read a bit of this article from Jason and Robert Combs. The article is called "A Ghost on the Water: Understanding an Absurdity in Mark 6:49 through 50." Rather than comb through the article, we're going to just hit very small pieces here. So, in Mark 6:49 and 50, Mark, the author, dramatically defines the disciples' miscomprehension of Jesus through the insertion of the absurd, the belief that a ghost could walk on water. He's saying the exegesis of this passage is enhanced by an understanding of ancient beliefs about ghosts, as described in tales of hauntings and similar phenomena in Jewish, Greek, and Roman sources. By identifying in this ancient literature characteristics common to the Markan account, one may detect how Mark initially establishes the expectation for a phantasmic appearance and then diverges significantly to emphasize the disciples' misconstrual of Jesus' messiahship. Right. So what it's getting at is there were ghost story motifs in the ancient world, in the Jewish, Greek, and Roman literature, and Mark sets up kind of some of these ghost story tropes and motifs, and then he's going to divert from them. He subverts them in a key way. Now, I'm just going to go to the conclusion because the conclusion has a nice kind of summation of what he gets at. Now, he establishes all this through the course of the article, so this is just the conclusion. And if you want, I can upload the article so you can read it. He says Mark presents several themes typical of classical ghost stories before diverging in a significant way. It is night, the time when there is at least the threat of phantoms looming. Jesus sees the disciples struggling to cross the lake against the wind and begins to walk toward them as light from the dawning sun has barely begun to illuminate their surroundings, the perfect time to sight a phantom. Yet it is not the nighttime hour nor the dimly lit sky to which Mark attributes the disciples' misconstrual of Jesus. Instead, he implies that their misunderstanding comes from seeing him walking on the sea. Mark suggests that the disciples thought that Jesus was a ghost when they witnessed him doing the one thing that ghosts absolutely cannot do: walk on water. The Jewish and Greco-Roman audience, familiar with the sort of ghost stories recounted above, and is referring to earlier in the article, would have been particularly dumbfounded by the disciples' misunderstanding. If, in addition to this, one considers the research of Yarbrough Collins, then the disciples' understanding becomes even more shocking. Collins, as noted previously, again in the article, reviews a wealth of Greco-Roman sources that describe divine men and gods walking on water. With so many prominent accounts, Mark's audience would certainly have understood Jesus' water walk in terms of divine manifestation. Yet, the disciples in Mark do not. So that's the key point here, is that ghosts do not walk on water. That's something they can't do. Yet when they see Jesus walking on water, they assume he's a ghost, even though, again, it's not something a ghost would do, it's something a deity, something that God would do. And yet they don't come to that proper conclusion. They miss it. I love this line here, though. This is good for, the Muslims or whatever. Mark's audience would certainly have understood Jesus' water walk in terms of divine manifestation. And now let's look at the scripture here, because it's not just generically that gods walk on water. Sure, in Greco-Roman context, sure. But in the biblical language, that is something reserved for the God of Israel. He's the one that does this. So we have a couple of examples of these. So we have Psalm 18. Granted, this one is a little bit more. It hits on the calming of the sea, but it's kind of some of the same things. You have the channels of the sea were seen, and the foundations of the world were laid bare at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. There are a number of these kinds of God having mastery over the sea. But specifically, the one that we really should zero in on is Job 9. I believe it's verse 8 specifically. Let's see. Yep. So, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Now, what Rogers talked about, though, he started us with with Exodus, right? Exodus 33:18, I believe. The show me your glory. So Moses asks to see the glory of God, but instead he's told he can't see it. You're not allowed to see it, but he proclaims his name, which is kind of interesting. So he asks to see the glory, but instead he gets the name revealed to him. This is especially interesting though, because if we were to read on in Job, right? So we have the verse 8, the trampled the waves of the sea, who made the bear and Orion, the constellations, the Pleiades and the chambers of the south, who does great things beyond searching out and marvelous things beyond number. That's an interesting phrase. Behold, he passes by me and I see him not. He moves on and I do not perceive him. If we were to actually click on this, the passes by, you're going to see it populate over here. This is the term that's used for God passing by. And in fact, the same passing by language is actually used in 1 Kings 19. I forget the verse exactly. It should highlight for us the verse I'm talking about. And I think I might have to re-click it to get it to work. Let's go right here. click it again, and it should. There it goes. So, and behold, the Lord passed by. The great strong wind, so on and so forth. So this is theophany type language, and just very interesting. Let's go back to here, because then you have also though the idea here of, let's just go ahead and bring this out. If we were to go to Judges 13, right? Manoah, the birth of Samson, that whole story. Oh, by the way, I didn't finish out this, that you have the pass by language, but you also have the see. I see him not. And of course, that's all over the place, because that's what Moses asks, is to see, to show me, the glory. But moving on here, the marvelous things beyond number. That's interesting, because again, if you've ever tracked on this stuff, you already know where this is going, because Manoah asks the name, again, the name of the angel of the Lord, and he responds and says, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" And then Manoah is gonna give this offering, and he offers it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. Again, it's the same term here as what's going on in Job. So here, Job, you have, who is the one that tramples the waves of the sea? Who made the bear and Orion, the Pleiades? Who does all these great things? Well, it's the one that walks on the water in Mark. It's the one that revealed his name to Moses. We could also do, who is it? Also, it's it's Isaiah 9:6. Unto us a child is born, a son is given, the government shall be on the shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor. Again, wonderful, it's the same word. Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, so on and so forth. One last thing that I wanted to kind of hit on, in addition to this, is he referenced in the video, he references Isaiah 43. And when he mentioned it, I was curious, because I was like, I was just tracking on this psalm, or this area, for something else. I couldn't remember what it was. So here he referred to this: when he passed through the waters, I will be with you. Right? It's kind of a new Exodus motif kind of thing. And so I scrolled down, and I was like, oh, this is where I was tracking earlier. Down in verse 7, everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. We have a couple other of these, of similar kind of language at the end of Isaiah 59. Let's just go to 60, and then we'll scroll back up. Let me click on this so it highlights for us on the other panel. And let's see, there it is. Right, so it's 59:19. So they shall fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. So we have the glory, or the name and the glory, kind of juxtaposed. Now, the reason why I was tracking on this earlier was because if you saw I did a whole video, so it's worth watching that video, because I go into depth. It gets into gematria, right? The value of the divine name, Yahweh, YHWH, was either 17 or 26, depending on how you did the math. The value of kavod, for glory, is also 17 or 26, again, depending on how you count the numbers. So, or the letters in this case. There's this weird conceptual link between the name and the glory that you often see kind of in this poetic stuff. And what it was Crispin Fletcher Lewis, what he was arguing was that Paul gives you something of a Shema, reworked Shema in 1 Corinthians 8:6. For us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. And as he points out, in his article, and others have actually pointed out how symmetrical this is. It's 13 words and then 13 words. It's 26 total words, again, 26, the value of the divine name. And in fact, 13 is the Hebrew, it's the value of the Hebrew word for one. So you have kind of one, and of course that's kind of the key word here. For us, there is one God and one Lord, right? So it's 13, 13, 26. But anyway, so he argues that it's gematria going on here, and that kind of encrypted in this, the way that it's set up, the structure of it speaks of the divinity of Christ. You could also see this a little bit in you get some of this like in, there's a number of places that you could go to this. So Philippians 2:10 specifically, where you have the or we could start at 9, Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. So that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father, right? So there you have name and glory as well. And of course, this kind of stuff, the Unitarian types like to grab hold of some of the language here, like they kind of bestowed on him, like as if Jesus is just there, um, waiting for, to be exalted in some sense, like he's just some creature that's waiting to be exalted. But what Paul does over here in 1 Corinthians 8:6, he really fuses by putting Jesus into this creed and confession and then encapsulating it in the value that, the 26. He really seems to, obviously, he seems to exalt Jesus into divinity on par with the God of Israel. But anyway, just some additional thoughts to a really good video. So I would encourage you to watch the whole thing. A lot of really good stuff in there. But anyway, take care.